Mom! Mom!
Hold on, just relax.
Mom!
Just relax, Nathaniel.
Police took 3 family members into custody from their home in the village this week.
I got an arrest warrant.
Yeah, you're Tamika, right?
Oh!
Just turn around.
It began with a simple question, the kind of question that should have had a simple answer. But when an 18-year-old girl lying in a hospital bed holding a newborn she never should have had was asked who the father was, she hesitated. A moment of silence, a glance toward her mother. Then in a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke a name, and the entire room froze. The nurses' hands trembled. Doctors exchanged glances. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Within minutes, hospital staff made a call. A DNA test was ordered, and when the results came back, the horror that unfolded would leave an entire community in shock. This wasn't just another case of teenage pregnancy, this was something else entirely. A secret buried within the walls of a family home, a girl too afraid or perhaps too confused to understand the nightmare she had been living, and a truth so disturbing that even hardened investigators struggled to comprehend it. By the time police arrived at the house, the damage had already been done, but the worst part? This could have been stopped. For years, the signs were there. Neighbors had heard things, teachers had noticed changes. Reports had been made, but no one did anything, no one asked the right questions, no one looked close enough. And because of that, a girl who should have been protected was betrayed in the worst way possible. This is the case of the Molden family, a case that will make you question everything. Have you ever heard of a case so disturbing it makes you question everything? Let us know in the comments. This is True Crime Files, a place where we uncover the stories that many would rather forget. The cases that leave behind more questions than answers. Crimes so shocking that they force us to ask, how could this happen? How could so many people look away? How does something so horrific stay hidden in plain sight? If you believe the truth should always come to light, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications because these stories need to be told. And today, we bring you the case of the Molden family. A story so disturbing it will stay with you long after this video ends. The Village, Oklahoma, a small town just outside of Oklahoma City, a place where streets are lined with single-story homes, where children ride their bikes without worry, and where families gather on front porches as the sun sets. A town where people know each other by name, where the biggest events are school football games and weekend barbecues. A town where nothing truly terrible is supposed to happen. But the truth is, appearances can be deceiving, and sometimes the worst crimes don't happen in abandoned alleyways or hidden back roads. Sometimes they unfold in the most ordinary of places, in a home just like any other, to a family that no one thought to question. For years, the Molden family blended into their neighborhood. They weren't overly friendly, but they weren't openly hostile either. They kept to themselves, their home quiet, their windows covered. Nathaniel Molden Sr., the father, was a man of routine. Up early for work, back home late, always keeping a distance from those around him. To most, he seemed like any other working-class man. But those who knew him well saw something else. A man who had little patience. A man who had strict rules and expected them to be followed without question. At home, his word was law. Tamika Molden, his wife, was different. Where Nathaniel was stern and commanding, she was quiet. She didn't argue. She didn't question. She was the kind of woman who moved through life unnoticed, always present, but never truly seen. To the outside world, she was a devoted mother. But those who paid closer attention saw something else. A woman who looked away when she should have stepped in. A woman who ignored what should have never been ignored. Then there was Nathaniel Jr., 19 years old, a high school dropout. A boy who had spent years slipping further and further away from the expectations of those around him. Some remembered him as distant, unmotivated. Others described him differently. Manipulative, controlling, someone who always found a way to get what he wanted, no matter the cost. But in the Molden household, there was one person who had no control, one person who was powerless to change her fate. An 18-year-old girl born with an intellectual disability, a girl whose mind was much younger than her body, a girl who trusted her family to protect her, a girl who never stood a chance. For years, the walls of the Molden home held a secret, one that no one outside that house could hear, one that should have been uncovered long before the day she gave birth. But no one saw it, or maybe they did and chose not to, because in small towns like the village, people keep to themselves. They don't pry into their neighbor's business. They don't ask questions when something feels off. And sometimes that silence comes at a cost. Do you think more crimes like this go unnoticed in small towns? Drop a comment below. It lasted for 2 years, day after day, night after night. A girl who didn't understand. A brother who knew she couldn't fight back. A home where safety was supposed to exist, but never did. Nathaniel Jr. took everything from her. Her innocence, her sense of security, her ability to trust. She didn't know how to say no. She didn't know that what was happening was wrong. She only knew that she was told to be quiet, told not to tell anyone, told that no one would believe her anyway. Her mother knew. She heard the sounds late at night. She saw the way her daughter flinched when he walked into the room. She looked away. Her father knew. He caught them more than once. He punished them both as if they were equally to blame. But then he let it continue, and when the truth was staring him in the face, he made his choice. He didn't stop it. He joined in. For 2 years, the walls of that house kept their secret. No one knocked on the door. No one asked questions. Not when neighbors heard arguments late at night. Not when the girl became more withdrawn, more anxious. Not when teachers noticed bruises that didn't have explanations. Not when a school counselor filed a report. A visit was made. A conversation was had. And just like that, the case was closed. Her mother told them everything was fine. She told them her daughter was different, that she had always been quiet. She smiled. She reassured them, and they believed her. So nothing changed. And behind those doors, the girl had nowhere to go, no one to tell, no way out. Then something happened, something no one in that house could hide, something that forced the truth into the open. She got pregnant, a baby growing inside of her, a child she couldn't understand. Her body changed, her stomach swelled. She didn't know why, she didn't know what it meant, and the people who did know told her to lie, told her to say nothing, told her that no one needed to know. Her mother hid it, her father ignored it, her brother said nothing. They thought they could keep it quiet. They thought they could control the outcome, but then the baby came. July 2024. The girl lay in a hospital bed holding a newborn she never should have had. Nurses hovered around her, their faces soft, their voices gentle. They asked her a question, a simple question. Who is the father of your baby? She hesitated. She looked at her mother. She fidgeted with the hospital blanket. And then she whispered the words that stopped the entire room cold. It might be my father. The nurses didn't wait. A call was made, a report was filed, and just like that, the secret the Molden family spent years hiding was about to be exposed. If this part shocked you, share this video with a friend. The moment the words left her lips, everything changed. Nurses exchanged glances, hands froze mid-motion, a stillness filled the room. A girl had just given birth, a girl with the mind of a child. And now she was saying something that made no sense. Or maybe it made too much sense. They asked again, this time carefully, gently. Who is the father of your baby? She hesitated. Her eyes darted toward her mother, searching for something. Approval, permission, reassurance. Her mother said nothing. The girl looked down, playing with the edge of the hospital blanket. And then, almost too softly to hear, she repeated it. It might be my father. A nurse left the room without a word. A phone call was made. The Oklahoma Department of Human Services was notified. A caseworker was dispatched. And suddenly, the secret that had lived in silence for years was now in the hands of people who would not look away. The caseworker arrived within the hour. She sat beside the hospital bed, notebook in hand, voice calm, patient. She asked the same question. This time, the girl hesitated even longer. She gave another name, a boyfriend, someone from the neighborhood. But when asked to describe him, she couldn't. She didn't know his last name. She couldn't say where he lived. She couldn't remember how they met. Her answers were scattered, uncertain. The caseworker knew something was wrong, something deeper than a teenage girl hiding a relationship. This was something else. Her mother was questioned next. Her responses were just as uneasy. Yes, her daughter had a boyfriend. No, she didn't know much about him. Yes, she had been aware of the pregnancy. No, she never thought to report it. Why? Because she didn't think there was a reason to. Her words were rushed. Her eyes shifted. She refused to allow access to any phone records. She grew defensive when pressed for details. Something was wrong, something was being hidden, and the caseworker knew exactly what needed to be done. A court order was secured. DNA testing was approved. Samples were taken. The young mother, the newborn baby, every male in the household. There was no more room for denial. The truth was coming, and the Molden family couldn't stop it. Days passed. The caseworker waited. The investigators waited. Then the results arrived. A sealed envelope, a few sheets of paper, numbers, percentages, a single conclusion. The caseworker's hands shook as she read it. Then she picked up the phone. The truth was worse than anyone had imagined. The father of the baby was not a boyfriend, was not a stranger. The father of the baby was her own brother, Nathaniel Jr. Should the parents also be held accountable? Tell us what you think. It was early morning. The sky still carried the dim light of dawn. The streets of the village were quiet, houses still tucked in the final moments of sleep. But at one house, the silence would soon be shattered. The Molden home, a place that had held secrets for far too long. Inside, Nathaniel Jr. was still asleep, unaware that his world was about to change. His mother was awake. She had been restless all night, pacing, checking the front window every few minutes. She knew this moment was coming. She had known since the DNA results came back. She had known since the caseworker's last visit, when she could no longer find the right words to cover up the truth. She had known since the phone call from her husband, who had spoken in a low, panicked whisper. They know. Then came the knock. Loud, firm, unforgiving. Inside, she froze. She didn't move right away. Maybe she thought if she didn't answer, they would go away. Another knock. Louder this time. Then the voice. This is the police. Open the door. She turned toward the hallway, toward her son's bedroom. She hesitated. Then, footsteps. Nathaniel Jr., half asleep, walked out of his room, rubbing his eyes. What's going on? Before she could answer, the knock came again. He was awake now. He heard it too. And in an instant, the confusion on his face twisted into something else. Recognition. He didn't need to be told what was happening. He already knew. Mom? His voice was quieter now, more desperate. She still didn't answer. Then, the door burst open. Officers moved in, guns drawn, voices sharp. Hands where we can see them! Nathaniel Jr. stepped back, hands raised slightly, panic settling in his eyes. His mother didn't move. An officer stepped toward him. Nathaniel Molden Jr., you are under arrest. He shook his head. His breath quickened. I didn't do nothing. The officer repeated the words. Nathaniel Molden Jr., you are under arrest for incest and sexual assault. His face went pale. His hands trembled. His mother still said nothing. The cuffs were placed around his wrists. The metal snapped shut. His breath came in short gasps now. No, no, please! His voice cracked. The officers didn't stop. He turned to his mother, eyes wide. Mama, tell them! Tell them I didn't... She still didn't move. She didn't speak. The officers led him toward the door. His legs buckled slightly. He tried again. Mom, say something! Nothing. Outside, the sun had risen slightly, casting a dull light over the scene. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains. Some stood on porches, whispering to each other. Word had spread. People were watching. The officers moved toward the patrol car. Nathaniel Jr. twisted his head, trying one last time. Please, I didn't do nothing. The door slammed shut. The car pulled away. Inside the house, Tamika Molden finally moved. She turned. Faced the officers, still standing in her living room. Her hands shook slightly. One of them stepped forward. Mrs. Molden, you are also under arrest. Her breath caught. Her eyes darted toward the hallway, toward the room where her husband had been moments before. They knew. They knew everything. And there was no more hiding. The arrests were just the beginning. The truth was out. The secrets had been exposed. The people responsible were finally being held accountable. But for the young woman at the center of it all, there was no undoing the past, no way to erase what had been done to her, no way to go back to the life she should have had. Nathaniel Jr. now faced charges of incest and sexual assault. The evidence against him was undeniable. The DNA test had spoken. His own words, his shifting stories, his growing panic, everything pointed to one inescapable truth. He had taken advantage of his own sister. For 2 years, he had done things that no one should ever have to endure, and the law would now decide his fate. But what about the others? His father, Nathaniel Sr., the man who should have been his daughter's protector, had instead been her enabler. He had seen the signs, he had caught them, and instead of stopping it, instead of calling the police, instead of removing his son from the home, he let it continue. And worse, he participated. His internet search history told the story, the desperate attempts to manipulate DNA results, the questions about whether siblings could share the same genetic markers, the frantic research on how to hide the truth. He had known exactly what was coming, and he had tried to stop it, not for his daughter's sake, but to protect himself. Tamika Molden, the mother, had played a different role. She had not raised her voice in anger. She had not forced her daughter into silence. But she had let it happen. She had looked the other way. She had been there night after night, knowing what was going on behind closed doors. She had heard the whispers. She had seen the fear in her daughter's eyes. And when her daughter became pregnant, when the truth could no longer be hidden, she made a choice. She didn't reach for help. She didn't run. She did what she had always done. She stayed silent. For that, both she and Nathaniel Sr. were charged with child neglect. But was that enough? Was it enough for the mother who had turned away? Was it enough for the father who had allowed and taken part in the abuse? Could any punishment truly fit the weight of what they had done? For the young woman, the consequences of their actions would last a lifetime. She and her newborn baby were placed in state custody, away from the people who had failed her in every way imaginable, away from the house where she had spent her childhood, never knowing that safety was supposed to be something real. She was given a caseworker, a therapist, a team of professionals tasked with helping her rebuild what had been destroyed. But how do you heal from something like this? She had never been taught how to trust. She had never been given the chance to make choices for herself. Now, at 18, she was learning what it meant to exist outside of fear, to speak without waiting for permission, to live without the constant weight of what had been done to her. But the road ahead would not be easy. Her mind worked differently from others. She struggled with basic decisions, she relied on routine, and now everything in her world had changed. The only home she had ever known, the home that had been a prison, was gone. Her family, the people who should have protected her, were now names in a courtroom, faces behind jail bars. The child she had given birth to, a child born from pain, from deception, from betrayal, would one day have questions of their own. Who was my father? Where did I come from? Why did this happen? Questions with no good answers. This isn't just a crime story, it's a failure at every level, a failure of a family, a failure of the system that should have caught the signs, a failure of the people who had heard things, seen things, and done nothing. But how do you heal from something like this? She had never been taught how to trust. She had never been given the chance to make choices for herself. Now, at 18, she was learning what it meant to exist outside of fear, to speak without waiting for permission, to live without the constant weight of what had been done to her. But the road ahead would not be easy. Her mind worked differently from others. She struggled with basic decisions. She relied on routine. And now, everything in her world had changed. The only home she had ever known, the home that had been a prison, was gone. Her family, the people who should have protected her, were now names in a courtroom, faces behind jail bars. The child she had given birth to, a child born from pain, from deception, from betrayal, would one day have questions of their own. Who was my father? Where did I come from? Why did this happen? Questions with no good answers. This isn't just a crime story. It's a failure at every level. A failure of a family. A failure of the system that should have caught the signs. A failure of the people who had heard things, seen things, and done nothing. The warnings had been there. Neighbors had heard shouting. Teachers had seen the change in her behavior. A school worker had filed a report. A caseworker had visited the home. And still, it had continued. For 2 years, the signs were ignored. And because of that, an innocent girl had suffered in ways most people cannot even begin to understand. Now, as the case moves through the courts, one question remains. Could this have been stopped before it was too late? And how many other victims are still out there, living in silence, waiting for someone to finally see them? What could have been done to stop this before it was too late? Drop your thoughts below. This case is far from over. The arrests have been made, the charges have been filed, but the legal process is just beginning. Nathaniel Jr. sits in a cell, waiting for his trial. His parents, once convinced they could keep their secret buried forever, now stand before a system that will decide their fate. But will justice truly be served? Will the punishment match the crime? Or will there be loopholes, technicalities, things that allow those responsible to walk away with a lighter sentence than they deserve? The law moves slowly, but time does not erase what has already happened. For the young woman at the center of this tragedy, the scars are not just physical. They are in the way she hesitates before speaking, in the way she flinches at sudden movements, in the way she is forced to relearn what safety is supposed to feel like. No court ruling can undo what she has been through. No prison sentence can give back the years that were stolen from her. But there is one thing that can still be done. We can listen. We can pay attention. We can choose to act when something feels wrong. Because stories like this don't happen overnight. They unfold over years, hidden in plain sight. And too often the people who could have made a difference look away. But silence is what allows things like this to continue. And one choice, to speak up, to report, to ask questions, could be the difference between another case like this and a life that is saved before it's too late. If you found this story important, make sure to hit that like button. Subscribe to True Crime Files and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. We will be following this case as it develops, because these stories deserve to be told, and because justice should never be a question. And remember, if you see something, say something. You never know whose life you might save. Subscribe now for more deep investigative true crime stories.